Welcome, everybody. So this is another great subject expert we're bringing in today, and I think you're going to get a lot out of this recording. We have Miguel Miranda, and I just want to briefly introduce Miguel Miranda to us, to you all that out there, and we'll get started into the questions. Miguel, we're happy to have you here, man. Welcome. Thanks for your time, first of all.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So Miguel has spent most of his career in Charlotte, Philadelphia, New York. He's lived in St. Pete for some time now, and he has over 27 years experience in the hospitality industry. And over the past 9 years, he's coached executives and business owners with the objective of optimizing their potential. Miguel is also the co-founder and partner of One Degree Hospitality. He might talk a little bit about that, I hope. And then he's one of the creators of a leadership program at USF at the Bishop Center for Ethical Leadership that focuses on working with professionals that are active in the hospitality industry. So you don't look old enough to have all that experience, man, but I'm sure it's you. I'm sure you're the real guy. Miguel, welcome.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. I'm almost 50, but people don't think that usually. Or my first managing partner job when I was running the Capitol Grill in Philadelphia, and that was like a $16 million a year property, and I think I was 28. Wow. And it was tough because everyone's like, did your dad hand this over to you? I'm like, we're corporately owned, but no. And so it does cause a problem sometimes, trying to figure out, just making sure you play the part. Yeah. I think that's the challenge for anyone, going into this business, obviously from the student's point of view, is when you go in and someone giving you credence to what information you may have. So more of the reason, really look at it and understand why your decision makes sense, and how it plays out. I think it drove me early in my career to really understand how the business worked. That way, as I made a decision, it wasn't just off the cuff or what some young kid thought he was doing. It was more so of, here's the data backing it up.
Yep. So we're going to get into restaurant trends and what's going on. There's so much changing in this environment, but can you just briefly give us just a little bit of and you started to there, just give us a little bit of your background and experience in the restaurant industry.
Yeah. So I like that most people, as you go into college, you maybe get a part-time job in a restaurant. So I initially got a job at a small mom and pop restaurant in Charlotte, North Carolina as a busboy. Never knew anything about restaurants. And I think day one, I was in training for a busser. Day two, I was a server. And within a couple of weeks, they actually had me like shift, manager. So it probably wasn't the best training, but the fortunate thing for me was the people that worked there. Again, I was 18 years old or 17 years old, but all the servers were seasoned cruise line guys that had been doing it for years and then just, got done with it. So they were friends with the owner. And they took me under their wing. Although it wasn't fine dining, it was upscale, casual. And it really helped me understand from the customer's point of view why certain things worked. And so from there, even though I was going to school for civil engineering and accounting, I fell in love with the industry and I just stayed with it to the point that that's kind of the route that I kept on going. Always swore I was going to stay independent. I loved that independent feeling. Eventually, I went to the dark side and went corporate. I ended up working with actually the world's largest full-service restaurant company, Darden, as I was working with the Capitol Grill brand for over a decade. But during that process, really got to understand what it took to run a business, not so much a restaurant, but a business, how to lead people. And so I never saw myself as an F&B guy. I love food, but I'm not a chef. I'm not a foodie from a point of view of like, I'm so concerned about, where that salt came from. I love wine and spirits and I understand it very well, but I was never the guy who's just trying to figure out, what vintage and the sourcing and this, that, and the other. I looked at everything from a business point of view. The only thing I really, focused on 110% on and to really understand was human nature. Because at the end of the day, I recognized I had to lead people. And so that's the biggest piece I had on, so whether it was selling, steaks or burgers or widgets or, I've actually consulted with medical practices. So whether it's dermatology, end of the day, you're still interacting with people and you're leading people. And I think that's the part that we got to make sure we focus on.
Yep. Wonderful. No, well said. So Can you think of any areas or just point out some specific facets of the industry that you've seen change drastically since you started in the industry? And, for example, how restaurants market themselves, how we hire and recruit employees and technology. And we'll get into, I'm sure, some of the trends, but
Right.
maybe just pick out like one, two, maybe three areas that you think have changed the most over the past 27 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's changed a lot. Obviously, I think if you beginning of my career, not that fast food wasn't a big deal, but it was McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, and then you had the next level up was Olive Garden style food. There wasn't anything in between. So in that time period, in the last 30 years, we've seen the development of the fast casual type concepts. And I mean, I can recall that when Chipotle first came out, and those kind of restaurants where you had a better experience. It definitely was a more expensive meal. A lot of conversations around where items were being sourced, quality of ingredients. Yet you didn't have a server, you didn't have a bartender, and that changed really the industry from a couple different ways. One, those brands expanded like wildfire. So put a definitely a lot more challenge of commodities and obviously where you're spreading, what the available supply. But I think it changed also really the regular casual dining. I think if it wasn't for the '08 crash, '08, '09 to 10, where you did see actually casual dining survive. You couldn't afford fine dining, but you could afford that if you wanted to go out to have a nice meal, have someone take care of you. But I think what it started doing at that point is putting more pressure on those type of restaurants to have more of an experience as opposed to just, hey, here's your food. I think I recall really from early on, some of these, chain casual dining restaurants were not that much higher on the spectrum from a service point of view than you would get at a diner. It was just maybe a better ambiance because they have more money, so they can actually afford more on build outs. But once the Chipotles and those guys really start blowing up, I think you start seeing a lot more redesign of restaurants, a lot more emphasis on what the hospitality is going to be like. You start seeing more commercials in that route, and that kind of kept going to trend. But obviously, I think the last few years, it's become tougher and tougher, especially with minimum wages going up throughout the country, higher cost pressures, and then. Obviously, if you look at the last 18 months, the world changed. I would answer the question to you a little bit differently, probably, beginning of 2020 than I am today. But if anything, I think it just sped up what was going to end up happening inevitably, which is kind of where we're at today.
Exactly. No, that's great. So, yeah, I think that's a key point. And I couldn't agree with you more. That's a key point in time there, 2008 housing crash and this whole new category that sort of popped up. So, yeah, let's dial into the past 18 months, year and a half, because we all know, the elephant in the room is COVID, and hopefully we're moving past it now, but we're still learning from it and having to change and adapt. So, what are some of the major trends, if we kind of drill down to some of the actual specific trends that you've seen happen over the past 18 months, and then maybe sort of get into what caused it, and maybe something, of course we think of COVID, but there might be some other reasons that started that trend as well.
Right. So prior to COVID, what we're already starting to see is a shortage of staffing. We're seeing less and less people getting into our industry. Definitely from an hourly point of view, a lot more options. If you look at, driving for Uber or, Shipt, people are figuring out more to do online based businesses and things like that. And so a typical, 19, 18-year-old thinking, hey, I need to get my first job. I'm going to go work in a restaurant, be a busboy or go wash dishes. Just started kind of changing it out. And you start seeing that even in the grocery store realm, which is another area where young workers start getting experience. So less baggers, a lot more automation. So we already started seeing that, and that was a challenge, especially in some areas where you saw some overbuild, where too many restaurants were being built out. A lot of, there's always someone who thinks they can build a restaurant and be successful, which is great, but it does put pressures on it. The last 18 months, put additional pressure for the fact that I think obviously when everything got shut down, those workers we already had got poached by other industries. We know for a specific, a lot of the technical colleges and smaller community colleges throughout the country targeted those individuals. Say, hey, in the meantime, once you get a degree or certificate program in either some of the trades, which we knew was needed. And because of change of schedule, because comparable pay, last weekends, last nighttime work, holiday work, some of those individuals are not coming back. So it made a problem already tougher as it was. And so that's kind of where we're at today as we start opening up. And I know there's a lot of conversation about the unemployment benefits that has that, that's the reason we're short staffed. It's part of the reason, but it's definitely not the whole reason. And so I think even as those benefits get rolled back, and it's been rolled back at this point, about 25 states. And so we are seeing some people come back to the workforce. It still doesn't solve the overall problem that we don't need have nearly as many people as we need to do the job. So that's forcing restaurateurs, current brands as well as future brands being developed to look at how do we deliver the guest experience, deliver the quality food and drink with less employees. And so we're seeing definitely more of a shift towards technology, as well as having the guest involved in the experience, i.e. ordering themselves at the table. And it's not just, fast service, where you have a kiosk. A lot of restaurants are using tableside ordering with QR codes, and COVID helped that. I think it kind of pushed that idea. It kind of gave us trained that way, same as not most of us now are not, surprised to have a virtual meeting like you and I are having. Maybe 2 years ago, this has been kind of weird. I'm trying to figure out how do you work through the technology. Well, the last 18 months has trained us to use this technology. Well, so we've done the same thing with a consumer base to train them to use maybe a QR code at the table side to look at a menu. And now we take the game up to just go ahead and while you're at it, go ahead and order. And that's allowed for operators to use less front of house staff, to solve the shortage. So that's kind of one of the biggest trends right now we're seeing. And obviously the other one is just the shortage in commodities, proteins, you name it across the board, just having enough of it, as well as plastic wares and things like that. Some of it has to do for the fact that a lot of industries were shut down for many months during the crisis, the pandemic. And so lack of manufacturing has now caused a shortage on supply, especially when states just, we rolled back opening almost all at once. And so that demand came flying through. Other parts of it is obviously, transportation challenges, cost, inflation, and then the borders, being quasi shut down at this point. That's a lot, making it tough to get a lot of the things from the Mexican border coming up. Fortunately for us here in Florida, we do get a lot of shipment containers coming from, from regular shipping as well as from China. But a lot of the world being shut down has put a lot of pressures. I think it's a short term, obviously, but it's put pricing at a higher level. And then I think the biggest thing that I think that has made change to the industry is related to the first item, which is shortage of staff. But almost overnight, the big box players, so you're talking about Target, Walmart, the Home Depot, the Lowe's type stores, went almost immediately to $15 to $16 minimum wage as a corporate decision, not necessarily as a legal. So obviously here in Florida, July 1st, we went up a few pennies. But that's almost negligible at this point because as I'm trying to attract talent, I'm also competing against the Target. I'm competing against the Walmart. I'm competing against the Publix. And if they're paying $15 an hour for a cashier, how could I pay a cook in the kitchen who's sweating and working really hard, 12, 13, even though that's much higher than the minimum wage and even higher than I was paying before. So overnight, which has been tougher for us, we've gone from $9, $10 an hour wages to 15 to 16, in some situations, $20 an hour. And as we all know, we look at our financials, that wreaks havoc to our business model. And so that's probably the biggest crisis that we're having. And to the point that I would say COVID doesn't even match up to this crisis. With COVID, we were all in it together. And obviously the government stepped in and helped out. The government's not coming in to help out on this one. There is no cavalry to help on this one if you don't do your work up front and figure out how do I run my business differently. So the conversation I'm having with clients as well as other individuals is if you were starting your business today, knowing the new situations of today, the new parameters of today, what would you do differently? And that's kind of where everyone's at right now. They're trying to revamp their business models to match up this new reality.
Wow. I'm typing so fast here, trying to keep up because you're just bringing up some just key points here, bullets. Going back to the HR, the human resource issue, where and then I guess we ended talking about the big box challenge, competing with them, and do you see is there a silver bullet solution to attracting people to the industry, or are we past that and now it's just sort of survival and maybe just going back to our budgets and looking at margins and changing prices down the road, and just do you think a lot of restaurants are just accepting the fact that there's going to be this shortage, so you know what, it's going to change the concept completely? Or do you think there's a way to attract um, employees where there's sort of maybe a time frame where you can promise them, if they continue to succeed at your establishment, management positions and moving up the ranks? How is there a solution? I mean, are we is it are we at a point where we can't go back and expect to get these number of employees, or are we just going to adapt and with our financials and maybe even get into more technology?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so here's where we're at. Obviously, I think it's a both and. We're not going to go back to where it was before, just because it's a new reality we're in. And the same thing happened as civilizations advanced. It's like saying, the farmers saying, "Hey, are we ever going to go back to having more people going to the farm once the Industrial Revolution happened?" No, but you advance. If you think about it, the size of the farms now and how many people actually work on them, it's crazy. Farms now are, I'm throwing some guesstimates out there, 10, 50 times bigger than they ever were back when the Industrial Revolution started. But the number of workers needed obviously has greatly reduced with the use of technology. So I think with anything at this point, we have to have a technological shift. If you go back to Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, every business that he analyzed that went from good to great, one key feature was there was a technology introduction that shifted the ability for it to speed up its growth and progress. And so I think we as a restaurant industry have to take a look at it and say, what are some technologies out there that can help us and properly leveraged can help us achieve some of this, not just to grow, covering the HR situation, but have proper growth. So that's one of it. But I think probably the biggest thing is give me a compelling reason to come join in your business. And I think that's true from anything. We took it for granted. We took it for granted for so many years that a young person, the only real option they had was to come hang out with us. We took it for granted that some individuals, regardless of their station in life, they'd rather off to go be a bartender because they can make so much more money, tips and everything else. And we didn't really care about what kind of work environment we offered them, or how we nurtured them, how we encouraged them. And so we ignored the science that's been developed for the last 20, 30 years in respects to human resources and people engagement and things like that. It's something I've been working on for the last 10 years. This is what I do with 1 Degree Hospitality. We teach leaders on how to connect with their guest base and develop work cultures where people want to stay and go work at it. And I think that's something that, regardless of what happens next, regardless of how the industry evolves, as long as we're going to have people involved in delivering our experience, then we have to really study that. I always use Chick-fil-A as an example. They're not the highest paying fast food chain. Actually, you probably get paid more at McDonald's than you're going to Chick-fil-A. And yet, and I do some work with them, so I know that they also struggle like everybody else trying to find talent. But they don't struggle quite as much. But one thing they don't struggle with as much is retaining talent. And there's a high cost in that. I think that high retention, high turnover cost is the worst thing that can happen to a restaurant business. And yet there's not a single line item we can point to and say, hey, here's where your turnover's at. I think it bleeds all over your P&L. It's in your sales. It's in your comps. It's in your food costs, and your obviously in your labor costs. It's in your repair maintenance. It's people who are constantly being churned, who don't really get the brand, who don't know the processes, second nature. is where it's costing you the money. So you focusing on creating a culture where people want to stay and develop for whatever time period that is. And so the final one is, don't assume everyone's going to have a career in this thing. Even if they're for a few, for a year, 2 years, what are they going to learn from you they can use in other careers down the road? And I think if you take that mentality, that will start shifting the situation. So I would encourage operators to say, we're not going down to a zero human resource availability. The pie is getting smaller. So the question is to you is, what are you doing to get a bigger piece of that pie? And if it's purely an ad out there, it's not going to help you.
That is just a serious paradigm shift you just talked about. And I you know what, I can't say I've ever thought about that until you just brought that up right now. So instead of looking, thinking we're going to always have all the employees we need and they're going to be there forever and it's going to be a career. It's so what you're saying is we should take the position where our concept will have to change, but sort of the training is going to have to shift and train to cope and to deal with somebody who's just going to be there for maybe a much short period of time.
Right.
That's a shift, because you're right. I remember those days where it was just the employers were just take it or leave it. This is what you get. Deal with the hot temperatures and the fire and sharp knives and screaming employees and screaming bosses at chefs, at cooks, and that's changed. And now it's just it's definitely changed a lot. Going back to there's so much to talk about here, but I want to go back to the tech part, the IT part, where you brought up the big box players. And it's easier, obviously, for big companies, big corporations that have chains to bring in new technology. And of course, the independents, they struggle with that, because obviously it's a lot more expensive for them to do that. Do you see that changing, where there's going to be technology, and there's probably there's stuff out there now that even independents can afford and use, but some of these advancements in technology since COVID hit, and do you think that there's some technology out there that independents can bring into their establishment to sort of change their concept a bit, keep up?
It's interesting having worked for Darden, where we basically had every bit of technology and database access and knowledge available to us. We had armies of accountants that could analyze trends for me, and I can just pick up the phone and look at that data and use different things. Having left there and then start working mainly with independents or companies who are looking to scale, one thing that I was passionate about was trying to find those technologies that will replicate what obviously the top guys are having. In reality, it's out there. It requires obviously time and energy to take a look at it and figure out and see how it plays best. Probably the number one question I get from people is, hey, what's the best POS out there? And as you know, it's a loaded question just because it depends what you need and what you're going to do with it. I had a conversation with somebody the other day about data. What do you do with data, and having data for the data's sake. So I think a lot of it is sitting down and figuring out what's most important to you, and then spend some time and go take a look at it. I would say that the biggest piece before you start bringing a technology in and spending the extra dollars on that is to really understand the financials of your business. And I think that's if there's an Achilles heel to our industry from operator and owner's point of view, is most of them do not either understand how the financial business model works. And definitely I would say majority, even if they did understand it, don't take the proper time or hire the proper people to constantly stay on top of it and look at it. So for example, you could buy some technology that could help you minimize the number of staff members you can be using in a front of house. But all most people look at is, what is the upfront cost? All right, it's going to cost me $600 to implement this technology, which is not that much money, but you'd be surprised how many people say, no, I don't have the 600, yet I'm willing to spend the extra money, having someone there. So one client we worked with, that we moved into having a tortilla machine, $7,000 investment per store. What did it save them? It saved them almost a $44,000 employee that they can pull out, because the machine helps it. Not that they replace it completely, they're still an individual, but you needed two individuals to keep it with a certain volume. So we can reduce down to one. You have a one-time fee of $7,000 versus the $40,000 annual salary that you look at. And so because it's annualized, a lot of times we don't think about it those terms. So it's the same old thing. I'm sure as a chef, you probably heard people saying, "Hey, I'm giving somebody a 50-cent raise," and the employee's like, "It's only 50 cents." So you start doing the math, realize no, it's a $3,000 investment. When's the last time you as a chef can make an owner, not an owner, but as a chef or an employee or a kitchen manager can make a $3,000 decision? Usually not. The owner, wait a minute, you can't buy a $3,000 item. And they don't realize that 50-cent raise without giving parameters as to why you gave the raise, not even review or anything else, has financial consequences. So I think financial literacy is probably the first thing to do before we start investment in technology. There's more development done on that one and testing some things out. So basically what they're doing is they're using virtual cashiers. So if you think about it, if your business model is shift to 100% on, well, not online, but more drive-through, do you have a cashier standing out in the hot sun, walking to and to from cars, or do you actually have someone when you pull up and you do basically a Zoom meeting with the cashier somewhere else? Do you have headquarters, somewhere else? And so kind of, if you stop and think about it, think about what support industry, the IT support industry did once you started having offshoring of support, right? Once you had call centers in the Philippines and India and somewhere else, you could reduce the cost needed to support that specific product. Well, the same thing is kind of something happening here. You could offshore some of those costs. So let's say you're in Philadelphia, where it's a high cost item area for labor. You could maybe have that virtual cashier sitting somewhere else. It also adds the ability to work with people who just don't have the ability. The lesser able, that maybe sitting out in the sun is not the best thing for them. They could work from home and deliver amazing customer service experience and get the order correct. We see it with phone banks for large companies, that they actually put phone banks together and answer incoming orders, versus the restaurant themselves having to deal with it, because they have the POS in front of them, they can put in the right restaurant.
Yeah, that's interesting. It really is. It's funny. I think a week ago I was contacted by a gentleman. He's a professor here, engineer, and he's in robotics at USF here. And he actually connected with me, and he was asking me about kitchen production and how they're doing a lot of research with that. And he showed me this whole PowerPoint. It was pretty impressive. And so I brought up the word mise en place, and how I thought, if there was a way, and the technology he was showing me was it was impressive, but it was still fairly crude. I mean, and they were doing tests on how a robot could pour liquid. That was where they were at. Because the hand's so complex, and what we actually do with our hands with a knife, it's pretty complex. We take that for granted. But we were talking about mise en place. And I said, if there was, I was trying to think like a chef. I said, one thing that might help production and maybe saving on labor is if there was an actual robot out there that could do just simple mise en place, like measuring out baking soda, flour, sugar, and then that robot would do all the mise en place for the pastry chef or for the line cook. The chop and dice and the measurement things, that would be huge. And he was quite interested in that, and I think that's what they're even before I said that, I think it sounded like that's what they're sort of shifting a lot of the research towards, is sort of the menial chop and dice type of stuff and measurements. So I guess we'll see where that is months and years from now. But my guess, from what he was showing me, that it's a bit of a ways off. But maybe the virtual cashiers, it seems like it's a little bit doable. And
there are things. I mean, I believe it's Royal Caribbean or Norwegian has 2 robotic bartenders that are, it's more of a show, and they actually have to have staff members kind of watch and make sure for spillage. The interesting piece, the way they redesigned it, is actually all the bottles were on the ceiling. They're upside down already. So basically the robotic arm is just doing this versus, grabbing something from a well. And I think that's the challenge that, we need to take a look at, is how do we solve the problem we have, but without looking at the current situation. Going back to, what 08, 09, presented for us, I immediately lost. So at that point, I was running a Capital Grill in Philadelphia. We lost about $2 million of top line revenue overnight. I mean, it just dropped. On top of that, we got blacklisted by a lot of big firms' expense reports. We just couldn't show up on an expense report when, people were hemorrhaging and losing money and losing homes. Being seen dining at a place with $100 a head didn't seem to be the right thing. We're across City Hall, so we used to have city council and the judges and the mayor come in all the time. Well, they couldn't be seen hanging out, so we were trying to figure out how do we solve this. And so one of the edicts I got from corporate was, hey, you got to get rid of labor. You have too many staff members. The problem with that was I know these individuals. I know their families, I know their kids, I know what they're dependent on. So we try to figure out how to save as many bodies as we could. And we did a lot of great things from an HR point of view. But one thing we did was, how do we operate with less people per shift, yet still deliver the same level of service? Well, we went back to the kitchen. We literally just moved everything around, aside from what needed to be where the boilers are, because they're right underneath the hoods. Everything else, we had to marry stations. We had to shift things around to the point that we were able to actually increase our sales eventually to higher points than before the crash with less staff. Now, once everything came back to normal in general, we didn't go back to the old game plan. We just kept on. We realized we learned something here. So adversity brings some of that. And I think that's kind of the thing we need to look at right now is, hey, how do we set up our restaurants in a different way, our kitchens in a different way that will help achieve what we need from the long term.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've been telling businesses for a long time that we knew there was going to go to a $15 minimum wage eventually. Usually it's overdone over 4 or 5 years. Is write your business plan as if it was already there today. Because what you do in the meantime is you learn a lot about what changes you got to make. You don't have to do it quite as fast. But if you get to that point already today, we just start making extra money because you're not having to pay $15 yet. And so I think that's the thing that we need to take a look at from a technology point of view as well.
Exactly. That's good. I'm glad you talked about flow and ergonomics and things like that of a production kitchen. That's interesting and huge. Now, I was talking to John Horn. He owns he's one of the owners of Anna Marie Oyster Bar in Sarasota, Bradenton. Great restaurant, fun place to go. And yeah, he was talking. This was about 6 months ago. I think we did 2 talks with him right after in March of 2020, and then just a couple months ago, I talked with him again. And they had minor shifts to their concept where when they were first trying to survive in the early times of COVID, I think they went from like 10% takeout to 70% takeout, and he was talking about these huge growing pains, and they had that, like you were saying, they had to change a lot of the setup and put tables here, tables there, and have the POS system there, and then they had to have all kinds of different to go products and different processes and protocols that they used, and it was painful. And he said what they learned very quickly is that they weren't really good at it, but they had to be, because now they were doing like 70% takeout from like 10 or 12% takeout. So those are minor. I guess if you kind of step back and look at it, 35,000 feet, those are some minor changes to their concept. But do you think from all of this, and we're kind of getting into this now, do you think there's a concept out there right now that we maybe quite haven't seen yet? There's like a new concept that's going to open up that sort of takes all of this into consideration, everything that we're talking about here, from the HR issue to the commodity shortage, to the minimum wage, and to the technology. I know it's hard to ask. You don't have a crystal ball in front of you there, but I'm just wondering if there's going to be that new sort of fast casual category that pops up, something like that now, because of all these different stress points that are going on.
Yeah. So, there are concepts already kind of modifying or moving their way down that road. And I think a lot of it is, first and foremost, we have to understand what business we're in. And once you understand what business you're in, then you can make the proper decisions as which way to go. So for instance, if you go to Japan, you can go to the vending mats where you can actually just go to a wall of like a vending machine, and you're not having, processed food. You're having amazing ramen, but there's a kitchen behind that that's pushing the thing through. And that's been going on for decades now. So that solved the situation where you're saying, hey, how do I get high quality food fast, without having servers or counters and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
And so I think it comes down to, what are you trying to deliver? Are you trying to just get food out there, or are you trying to deliver an experience? And once you define out what your brand stands for, then the question is, all right, well, how do I use technology to support me in that respect? Back when I was at Capitol Grill, we used Open Table in a whole different way that most people actually use Open Table. They use Open Table. Most people use it as a reservation management software, right? We didn't really care about that aspect, although that's what we used it for. And we did proper mapping. We did a lot of setting up for it. One of the things that we pioneered at that time with Open Table, and actually a lot of the features it currently has, was because of what we were doing at Capitol Grill. We had both reservation codes and notes, as well as guest codes and notes. So for instance, if I knew that Joe likes to sit in a booth, specifically booth number 34, once we found that out about you, we put that in your profile. The next time you called, the hostess would answer the phone and say, hey, Joe, I'm glad you're coming back. We'll see you next Friday night, and we have a booth prepared for you, reserved for you. And you're immediately saying, wow, that's awesome. And so that was our use of technology. Then we had to start a conversation about, because we had multiple stores, if you decided to go to the instead of coming to the one in Tampa, you went to the one in Sarasota, how will we share that information? So also you show up to the Tampa one, because you normally go to Sarasota. And, Mr. Aspen, I'm glad you're welcome with us. We see you normally like to have a booth when you dine in Sarasota. Would you like to have the same thing here? Now, what does that deliver? Customized hospitality, right? The same thing that the Ritz-Carlton does and Four Seasons does, we started doing as a restaurant 20 years ago. So I think looking at it, how do we solve the hospitality question with technology is really important. There's a piece of technology right now called Tably, which is basically either Fitbit, or you can use an Apple Watch or a smartwatch to basically allow the customer to press a button at the table and to alert their server they need them. Okay. Now that sounds kind of crazy. You're thinking, oh, the service should be intuitive. Come on, man. Really? We're not intuitive enough. We're taking an order of a 6-top, and people are asking a lot of questions. My 2-top behind me, who needs another drink, is waiting for me, right? Not because I'm a bad server, it's I can't get to you fast enough. Pressing that button alerts me that you need me. It also alerts the manager, the shift leader. And so the restaurants that I'm working with that are using that, we saw a couple of things. One is we actually needed less staff, because we weren't using staff thinking they needed so many staff members to cover so many tables, because jumping around. We recognize the staff will be where it needs to be based on what the customer's needs are. The next thing we actually saw was increase in sales. More often than not, it was either people needing to ready to go, right? So we turned tables faster. We saw guests who actually needed additional drinks or questions on certain menu items. And so if that server couldn't get to it, because the server had to go to the table and turn off the beacon, a manager went there, and the manager got that order, got that refill, got that check processed faster. And we saw guest satisfaction scores either stayed the same or went up. And so no one looked at the technology saying, oh, they're cheating. I think a lot of times operators were thinking, oh, we have to have this magical way of doing things. And if we use technology, we're cheating. No, we're not cheating. So I think there's different ways of kind of delivering what you need to deliver based on the technologies around you.
That's great. I think, and we're coming to the end of this, and I think this is just a fantastic place to end, because you're talking about the key here right now, just the guest experience, always questioning what the guest wants and what a guest experience you want to provide for them. And we never want to lose track of that. And so maybe it's not less human touch if you're bringing in technology. Maybe it's just using the technology to optimize what you already have there. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah. So I think that's again, it's I've seen places put technology or trying to solve things that it doesn't make sense for their brand, right? Yeah. And I've seen places that use technology to enhance the brand or enhance, what they're doing. There's a hotel in New York that we've been to a few times that actually has a robot that brings items to your room that you may need, right? So if you need like toiletries or whatever else, so you call the front desk, and typically you call the front desk, say, hey, I left my toothbrush, can we have one? And they either say, hey, we got to come down to the front desk and get one, or we'll bring one to you eventually. And then you're kind of waiting for that person to show up, and you got to put your robe back on. And it's being intrusive to some respect, right? You're like, oh, thanks. And it's kind of that awkward exchange. Well, now you have a robot that's doing it. It's kind of cute, looks kind of unique, different. You're taking pictures. I think we must have ordered, I don't know how many different things from front desk that we didn't really need. We just want to see the robot.
Right.
Each time we did it, we took videos, we took pictures, we put it on social media, we shared it on Facebook, we shared it on Instagram. Friends commented on it. And so what it did was there was an investment of, you no longer have to have an employee running around, extra bellhop running around to do these things. But you also added a novelty to the thing. So, I'm not sure the total cost. I think the cost of that robot somewhere around $15,000-$20,000, which is less than you're going to pay for that bellhop position, year round. But also the added benefit of the marketing. And so I think looking at those things and making those decisions properly makes sense that, yes, we can't afford it because we're already spending it, but more so, how does that add value to our brand? And I know for a fact, personally, I have a lot of friends who've actually gone to that hotel because of what we posted. And so I think it adds additional revenue to you. And something we can probably do in a follow-up conversation is never forget the employee experience. Because I think without that idea in mind, you're going to continue to eventually have to just go completely to robots, which is never going to be the case. So understanding the employee experience as to onboarding, again, using technology for that and training videos, onboarding mechanisms, which are becoming more and more available as well as inexpensive, is important to make sure that employee understands what they're getting themselves into and how they're being trained and what's being expected of them. And I think we've done an amazing job as an industry to take care of the customer. We have not done as a great enough job as an industry to take care of our employees. And if I'm telling someone, hey, do I focus more money on or invest more time and energy on robotics and these software solutions, or do I use it more for training and development? Training and development. We win it all day long. And so that's the big area, I think the big frontier of how we train and develop our workforce for the future. And there's some great opportunities there.
Well said. Well said. That's great. Yeah, because if we don't take care of our own employees, we can't expect to take care of our guests. It's fabulous. Well, Miguel, hey, thanks so much for your time. I know you're a busy man, but I really appreciate you coming in. And yeah, I'd love to do a follow-up conversation and maybe bring you in onto a panel to talk more about this, maybe on some of those specific challenges we have. I think the HR one really sort of lights up here, this HR challenge. But thanks for your time, Miguel. I appreciate it very much. Thank you, sir.
Well, thanks for having me.